Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, today we're going to talk about backups on our Debian system. This is one of the things that somebody listed in the comments, so please lift other things you want to talk about in the comments. And what we're going to do here is just talk about some applications for automating your personal file backups and your system file backups. Specifically, they asked about setting up Timeshift. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But this requires us talking about a little bit about backup strategy. And everybody needs to have a backup strategy. Unfortunately, most people do not actually do a good backup strategy. And so we have to stop and encourage people once again. If you've not backed up your system for a while, back up your system. But what do we mean when we talk about backing up our system? Well, there's a few things. First, you have personal files. These are your photos. These are your contacts. These are your emails. These are your music files, your video files, all those types of things that you want to keep safe. So you should have a backup system of those. But your backup of your personal files are distinct from the backup of your system files. To understand the difference, if our whole system goes wonky and we can still extract our data files, you're in a lot better position than if your whole drive goes corrupt and we have a backup of our system so we can get our operating system back, but we have no data left. Well, that leaves you in a really bad spot. Now, this is why you need to have a couple of them, but if you're only going to do one type of backup, do personal file backup. I personally do not do personal system file backups. I only do personal file backups. The reason is, running Linux, if you have a good backup strategy, redeploying your whole system onto a computer and having all your personal files and everything working is just as easy. Especially here on Linux, nearly every bit of customization that you do to your desktop is in your home root folder. Any of the customizations that you've done to your desktop environment, they are in your root folder, in your home folder. So if you do a comprehensive backup, you can literally on Linux take that backup file, if done right, drop it on top of a brand new built system, and you will not even know there's really a difference. Now, that being said, system file backups are also important because the system files is effectively a restore point. If something goes wonky in the update, you can restore to a previous version. That restore does not affect your files at all, but it affects everything around your files. And so it's important to do that occasionally. It depends on what you're doing and how in love you are with your exact system. Obviously, if you're doing system-wide font installs and other system-wide customizations, then your system file backups are certainly more important. We do system file backups when we're doing backups of websites. So, for example, if you're going to update your Joomla or your WordPress business file, website setup, you want to take a full system backup before you actually run your system upgrades because of the possibility of something going wrong on a live production system. And so today we're going to talk about both of these. Now, I personally do not use any applications for managing personal file backups. I plug in drives, I manually move files over. This is because it can become complacency to start working on these things. In other words, at one point in time, years and years ago, going back almost 15, 20 years, I used to run some automated backups tools. The problem is they backed everything up. They said, okay, done. And I didn't go back and double check the files. And the thing for about 2 or 3 years was actually failing to do backups until I realized I needed to go back and look at some of those backup archives and realized large chunks of data were missing because the automated tool had an error and it didn't actually tell me that. Now, that is partially my fault for not verifying my backups, but it's also an error in the application where it doesn't flag that an error had occurred. And so, yes, it is very important to do that. Now, on my Open Media Vault, my full NAS system, the backup for that is automated. There isn't really an easy way to do that one manually, so I have it set up to plug in a drive. Now, your system file backups, these are done around, as we said, the operating system. When you're doing your personal files, it's always better to save a copy of your personal files somewhere else. I use the term remote here. That could be a cloud server. it could just be an external hard drive. In my case, for those important files like are on my NAS and my main backup system, I have a main backup system. The data on that is backed up to 2 USB drives and 1 extra hard drive. The extra hard drive and USB drive, one of the USB drives is actually at a safe at a friend's house, and then I keep the other ones separate from that. And so I have a mirror of the system in 3 separate locations at any given time. The reason you want to do that so perfectly in that measure is to make sure that you're not being exposed to like ransomware or encryption malware, which is going to encrypt up your files, where if those things are all easy to access to the cloud or all just on the same drive, you're going to lose your backups if something bad happens. But with the system file backups, you generally want them stored locally because you need to utilize the application to put them back in the same spot. There are exceptions to be made for both of these, but that is effectively the case. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to walk through a couple of tools here. Now, since I don't generally mess with the system backups and I do automated, I do manual personal backups, none of these applications we're working with today are actually applications that I have any real experience with. I'm just going to go ahead and use them here just to illustrate how they work. So what I've done is for my remote backup is I have plugged in a USB drive called Files. Since I don't know if this software package is going to completely kill everything on there or not, I just chose a drive that if everything happens to be wiped out on that, we will not have concern about it. So we'll just go ahead and type in backup. All right, so now we have a list of possible options for backup. And looking at all the different options, I looked at this one here, PikaBackup, and this guy here, it looks like it's going to be pretty good. You can use a USB drive, you can use it on a local folder, you can use an FTP server or an SMB server. You can do any of those. It has a lot of options to make your personal backups. It is available only on FlatHub, so if you have not installed FlatHub on your system, then you're going to need to do that prior to installing. So we'll go ahead and let that get itself installed. Now, for our system backups, we are going to be using the specific application that was asked about, and that is the application called Timeshift. So down here, Timeshift is an application that is available on a lot of different distributions. Here it's from the Debian repository, so you do not need to worry about installing FlatHub or Snap or anything like that. You'll see this one, since it's in the Debian repository, we do need to enter our password to install that one. All right, so now that that is installed, we'll go ahead and close our software store. First, we're going to have a look at our personal backups. So our personal backups, remember, you want these to be remote if possible. And that could include a USB drive. It could include a NAS server. It can include an FTP server. So you have some local and some cloud-based options you have. So there's no backup here configured. So we're going to go ahead and set up a backup. So first, it's going to ask create a new repository. So you can do a location on a disk. So here, if I go ahead and click our select, I'll go ahead and pick our files. So there you have it. Right there, sharing a space with my Windows 98 ISO, and this is Office 95. How sweet. All right, so now we have the option to encrypt it or to unencrypt it. We're just going to encrypt this with a really weak password called Bob Password. How's that sound? Don't do something that weak. Hopefully it does not throw up an issue with using such a crappy password, but for the case of setup here, we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, we'll go through and look at another one. So here is this backup here. And the other thing you could do, let's hit backup here. And if you want to hit a new repository, you can do a remote location as well. So you see SMB or SFTP. You can use either of those for your backup folders. So if you have an FTP server, you can do that. You can also do the, it looks like you can do an SSH. So if you want to run to an SSH server somewhere, or you can do an SMB server. So either one of those you can do. So there's a lot of neat options you can do, and then you could encrypt or unencrypt it. As a point of security, if you do something local, like with the flash drive, generally it's a little bit safer to not necessarily encrypt unless you have some really serious data that has to be encrypted. If you're putting this on any cloud protocol, definitely encrypt this guy. So that's going to give you an extra layer of protection. All right, so here is our backup. It's never been run. And you can see the backup information. Begin by carrying out your first backup. Go ahead and hit backup now. And the files to backup here, we can use anything. This is going to say everything inside of the home directory with the exception of caches. So the cache data can be regenerated as needs be, and everything else in the home directory, which is going to include your local configuration files and things like that, all of that stuff can be used to reestablish your system very easily. So you can see that it's halfway done. There's not a lot of data on here. I put in here the one video and the 3 MP3 files we did for testing our DVD setup. And I actually threw some photos on here as well, just so we get a chance to see how this is going to work. And you'll see it says 1 minute left. So we're going to go ahead and let this go, and then I'll come back. All right, so it says it is complete. So if I click on this guy here, the amount saved, number of files, and backup space used. So here's our various archives. And we can do this as a schedule. So you can do this and create regular backups, daily, hourly, weekly, or monthly. And then let's disable schedule, and then regularly clean up archives, remove the old archives after creating new backups, and then you can keep many, some, or custom. Okay, many, some, or custom. Very good. Okay, so that's giving me what they are. Here's a lot of them. This is how many of these to keep. And you can also do keep some, which is going to be 23, 6, 2, 6, 24, 7. Okay. So you can see how many we are going to keep in that one there. So you can go ahead and select how many of those you'd like to keep. So let's see what we can do here with these files if I wanted to bring them back. So it looks like what I can do is I can click on the browse saved files here. And what it's going to do is it's going to mount this inside of our system to be able to show us what is in the desktop. So nothing in any of those. This is where we have those 3 MP3 files. And then here's the photos. And then there's next place has that one in it there. And then my guess is if we do a Control H, we'll also see all of the hidden system files in here as well, which are the things saving the configuration for my particular desktop. So there we have how to access that. So of course you could only get to this guy here if we had plugged this guy in. So if I hit this, you'll see, oh, it's busy. It's because this guy is still looking at it. Let's cancel that so it doesn't keep on trying, and then we will unmount the archive there, and now we can unmount our drive location. So there is how you can get in here, view the archives, see the archives. Now, I guess my big question is, now that we have those files in that encrypted format, how can we see those elsewhere? As for restoring your files on a brand new install, should a catastrophic event occur, you can easily plug the flash drive in, install PikaBackup to any other system, and you can browse to it. Let me show you where that is at under PikaBackup. Under here, using existing repository, location on disk, and then you can search for where that file repository is at. So you can easily install from there. And I tested, as you can see here, I tested this on a fresh Linux Mint install. I just went into FlatHub and installed the PikaBackup and verified that I could browse and restore all of the files off of that flash drive onto that new system. So this will work very well as a backup. And the encryption worked well. I just needed to remember my Bob password, secret password there. All right, now let's move on over to Timeshift. So Timeshift is going to give you a backup point on your system without saving a copy of your files. You have two options, of course, depending on the way your file system is set up. We're using rsync because we're set up here on an ext4. If you're using Btrfs, you could use that option there as well. So we're going to go ahead and hit next, and then it's going to do an analysis of the size of the disk to choose the best location. So you'll remember this one here, we're going to default to saving it on the disk, because the only thing that would prevent us from using a system restore on the disk is a catastrophic failure of the disk itself. And if the catastrophic failure of the disk itself, well, what's the point? Just start over anyway. I guess some argument can be made for making your system restore point and moving it on over. Now, the first thing to note here, the default location it gives you is in the boot sector. That will completely mess up your operating system. Don't put it there. How do we know? Grand total size, 400 megabytes, and ext2, that's going to be a bootloader. This is the other spot, which is going to be that you can see 489 gigabytes, and 480 gigabytes is free, meaning our whole operating system, including the few files that we have, is only taking about 10 gigabytes of data. So we want to make sure that you're not saving it into your boot drive there. That will completely crash your system. Don't do that. All right, we're going to hit next. You can choose here how many snapshot levels. So this is going to say we're going to keep 5 daily snapshots. That is insane. Let's go ahead and let's set this up. Let's do 2 weekly snapshots. So maybe we'll do keep 1 daily. So if something goofy goes on, you can restore to yesterday's. And then if not, here's your weekly. And then you can also go ahead and set up monthly, hourly, or whatever else you want. Okay, so the boot is going to make a copy of boot sections. Oh, no, I'm saying this is every boot up. I'm sorry, my apologies. That also would be insane every time you turn your system on, unless, of course, you only turn it on, every other, month or something. Who knows? And then this is going to stop emails because this uses cron jobs, which will email you. Your administrator, if it's set up, turning that off is going to prevent the system from annoying you. And then over here by default, it's going to exclude everything in root and everything in your home folder. Now remember that root is the folder for your root user. Home is your folder for your main home user. And if you had other users on the computer, they would also be listed in here. To be sure what we are talking about, let's go ahead into our system and look once again at a Debian file structure. So with this, we have a boot here. This guy is usually a symlink up to a separate boot sector. The boot sector gets loaded into this drive, allowing you to make changes to grub and whatever else when you're doing some fixing and configurations. Your root folder, which is right here, you'll see has an X because we don't have permissions to access it. Your root folder is basically the home folder for the root user. Now, when I installed this Debian, unlike when we did in the virtual machine, the root folder is actually, the root user account, I should say, is actually disabled, but by default, the system will go ahead and keep anything in there. If you were to open this guy up, and since I have sudo privileges, I can do that. The folder is empty. And here is our hidden folders. So obviously it's not completely empty. There's some hidden folders. These are all things relevant to the root user. So every new user account is going to have these files automatically generated inside of it. All right. Now we have our home folder, and inside of your home folder, you're going to have a separate folder for each user on the account. This is where all of your files are, and showing hidden files, you can see it has our files. It has the configuration files that will bring with us all of the customizations we have on our user level. So by default, Timeshift does not want to save any user files because its purpose is not to restore user files. Its purpose is to fix the operating system itself if an error had occurred. And so we don't want to do that. Now we can toggle this if we want to. We can include all files, include only hidden files. So you can do that. You might want to do that if you're making a few small configuration files. The problem with saying including all files is if you do have to do a restore to 2 weeks ago's backup, because that's when you figured out, like 2 days after the last backup is when your operating system was completely borked up and you couldn't go any further than that. If you are including all files, it is going to undo all of the personal file data you've done up to that point in time. So generally, that's why we want to keep 2 separate backups, one for our personal files and one for our system restore point. Go ahead and hit next and hit finish. And so now what it's going to do is it's going to, on its schedule, it's going to go ahead and create a snapshot, or you can always just push the button here to create the system snapshot, which it's going to go ahead and give you an idea of how long this is going to take. So now it's syncing individual files into its particular location, utilizing a cron job, and then when this is done, you're going to have a backup of your system. All right, so our system restore point here is done, and you can see the size of it here. Well, you can see the information. Here's browsing the files, and where this guy's going to be at if you're looking for where these files are based on our settings. Head on over to your main drive, and then you'll find this new folder called Timeshift. And inside of your Timeshift, you have your folders for this. Here's your snapshots. Here is the date. And then here is all of the files. So you'll notice there's nothing in here, even if I toggle the hidden files on. So there's nothing in that directory, although the folder is preserved because there might be links to that user folder in the system restore points. Of course, if you want to restore it, you can just hit the restore button, and then you can pick your path here. So DM, this is your restore point to this. And then here you can choose what you're keeping, what you're not. Keeping the root device, bootloader options. So if you want to reinstall Grub, you can try it either way, depending on what the type of system crash you had, and then go ahead and hit next, and then it's going to do a comparing files and then resync those out. I don't actually really want it to do that. Let's see, confirming actions. So you'll see really the only change, it did an rsync, and it says, well, the only change is right here. That's going to be something related to folder changing, you know, what's in the Timeshift folder and a few configuration files. So we obviously don't need to do anything with that. But there is your basic settings about utilizing Timeshift and how to get that done. So now you have solutions for personal file backups and for system restore point backups on Debian. Continue letting me know the types of things you want to see in the comments, and we will keep the Debian tutorial videos coming on out. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux. Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.